Good morning. This is Kent Blaylock with SDG Bible Study. That's the Soli Deo Gloria Bible Study coming to you on this Thursday morning, January 26th, 2023. Hope everyone is well on this Thursday morning, and I hope you're prepared and ready to hear some more reading from the book, The Jesus Story. We're well into the final days as Jesus is now on trial, a bogus, illegal trial, and that's where we'll pick up this morning. So join me as we read from the Jesus Story. Simon Peter and another disciple kept following Jesus from a distance, even up to the courtyard of the high priest. The other disciple was known to the high priest and went into the courtyard with Jesus, but Peter stood outside the door. Then the other disciple went out and spoke to the servant girl who tended the door and brought Peter in. The servant girl then said to Peter, "Aren't you one of this man's disciples?" "I am not," Peter replied. Because it was cold, the servants and temple guards had started a fire of coals in the middle of the courtyard and were standing by it, warming themselves. Peter was standing with them by the fire, warming himself. When they had all sat down, he sat down as well in the middle of the guards to see what would happen. "Aren't you also one of his disciples?" they asked him. Peter denied it. "I am not," he said. The chief priests and the elders and the entire Sanhedrin kept trying to find false witnesses to testify against Jesus in order to execute him. They could find none. Though many false witnesses came forward to accuse him, their testimony did not agree. At last, two stepped forward and spoke against him. "We heard this man say, 'I'll destroy this temple of God made by human hands, and in 3 days I'll build another not made by human hands.'" But even then, their statements did not agree. So the high priest stood up before them and questioned Jesus. "Do you refuse to answer?" he demanded. "What is this they are accusing you of?" But Jesus was silent and made no answer. Once more the high priest said to him, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One? I charge you under oath by the living God. Tell us whether you're the Messiah, the Son of God." "It's just as you have said," Jesus answered. "I am. Furthermore, I tell all of you that later on you will see the Son of Man sitting by the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, "He has spoken blasphemy. Why do we need any more witnesses? Listen, you have heard his blasphemy. What do you think?" "He deserves to die," they answered. Everyone condemned him as deserving death. Some of them began to spit in his face and strike him with their fist. The men who were holding Jesus began to mock him. After they had blindfolded him, they kept slapping his face and taunting him. "Prophesy," they said. "Prophesy to us, you Messiah. Who just struck you?" And they said many other insulting things to him. Meanwhile, Simon Peter was sitting below out in the courtyard. One of the high priest's servant girls saw Peter warming himself. She looked intently at him where he sat in the light and said, "This man too was with Jesus of Nazareth." She went closer to him and said, "You too were with the Galilean." But Peter denied it in front of them all. "Woman, I don't know him." He said, "I don't even know what you're talking about." Then he went out to the courtyard entryway, and a rooster crowed. A little later, when he had gone out to the gate, another woman saw him and said to those nearby, "This man too was with Jesus the Nazarene." Another man saw him and said, "You too are one of them." But again Peter denied it, this time with an oath, "I don't know the man." The servant girl saw him again. "This man is one of them." She began saying to those nearby. Again Peter denied it. About an hour later, another man spoke up and insisted without a doubt this man was with him, because he too is a Galilean. Then one of the servants of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, said, Didn't I see you in the garden with him?" The others standing there came close to Peter and said, "Certainly, you're also one of them. You're a Galilean. Your speech betrays you." But Peter denied it again and began to curse and swear. "I don't know this fellow you're talking about," he shouted. "I don't know what you're saying." While he was still speaking, a rooster crowed a second time, and the Lord turned and looked at Peter. Then Peter remembered what the Lord had told him. "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. And before it crows the second time, you will deny me 3 times. Peter went out and wept uncontrollably, with bitter tears. As soon as daylight came, all the elders of the people, both the chief priests and the teachers of the law, met together against Jesus to execute him. They brought him up to the whole Sanhedrin and said, "If you are the Messiah, tell us." He said to them, "If I were to tell you, you would certainly not believe. And if I were to ask the questions, you would not answer me or let me go. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated by the right hand of the power of God." "So you are the Son of God?" they all said. "It's just as you say," he replied, "because I am." "Why do we need further witnesses?" they said. "We have heard it ourselves from his own mouth." Then the whole crowd arose and tied up Jesus and took him to appear before Pontius Pilate, the governor. When Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that Jesus was condemned, he was overcome with remorse. He returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders and said to them, "I have sinned by betraying the blood of an innocent man." "What does that mean to us?" they replied. "Deal with that yourself." Judas threw down the pieces of silver in the temple, left, and went out and hung himself. The chief priests took the silver pieces and said, "It isn't legal to put these in the treasury since this is blood money." After discussing the matter, they used the money to buy the potter's field as a burying ground for foreigners. This is why even today it is called the Field of Blood. In this way, the words of Jeremiah the prophet were fulfilled, and they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price at which he was valued by the sons of Israel, and used them to buy the potter's field, as the Lord directed me. Then the Jews led Jesus from Caiaphas to the Roman judgment hall, where Jesus stood before the governor. Because it was early, they did not go into the judgment hall. They didn't want to become defiled and be unable to eat the Passover. So Pilate went out to them. "Of what are you accusing this man?" he asked them. "If he were not a criminal," they answered, "we wouldn't have brought him to you." "Take him and judge him according to your law," Pilate replied. "We aren't permitted to execute anyone," the Jews responded. In this way, they were fulfilling what Jesus said about the kind of death he would suffer. They began accusing him, saying, "We found this man subverting our nation and forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar. He says he's the Messiah, a king." The chief priests and the elders continued making many accusations against Jesus, but he made no reply. "Do you refuse to answer?" Pilate said. "Don't you hear how many accusations they're charging you with?" Jesus remained silent, not answering a single charge. The governor was astonished. Pilate then went back to the judgment hall and called Jesus. "Are you the king of the Jews?" he asked him. Jesus replied, "It's just as you say. Are you asking this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" "Am I a Jew?" Pilate answered. "Your own nation and the chief priests handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But at present, my kingdom is not from here." "Then you really are a king?" Pilate said. Jesus answered, "It's just as you say, I am a king. I was born for this, and for this I came into the world, so I might testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth hears my voice." "What is truth?" Pilate asked. After saying this, Pilate went out again to the Jews and said to the chief priests and the crowds, I find the man guilty of nothing. But they strongly insisted, he is stirring up the people. His teaching throughout Judea, starting from Galilee and teaching even to this place. When Pilate heard this, he asked whether the man was a Galilean. On learning that he was from the jurisdiction of Herod, he sent him up to Herod, who happened to be in Jerusalem at that time. When Herod saw Jesus, he was quite pleased. For a long time he had wanted to see him, since he had heard many reports about him and hoped to see him perform some miracle. He probed him with many questions, but Jesus didn't answer them, even though the priests and teachers of law stood there viciously accusing him. After Herod and his soldiers had ridiculed and mocked him, they clothed him in a gaudy robe and sent him back to Pilate. From that day on, Pilate and Herod became friends. Before this, they did not get along. And that's going to conclude our reading from this morning. As we're well into the trial of Jesus, as he has now been sent to Pontius Pilate, and then on to Herod, and then back to Pilate. So we will pick up the remainder of this tomorrow, this trial, and to the crucifixion. I hope you have a blessed day today. I hope you enjoy the day that God has given you and give him the glory in it. Soli Deo Glory.